Hey Night Owls, tonight we're diving into something that's equal parts bizarre and fascinating. Ancient Chinese food. I know what you're thinking. Rice, dumplings, maybe a bit of dim sum. Sure, we've all had those, but ancient China was way weirder than you might think. We're talking about everything from bizarre meats to, let's just say, foods that would definitely raise an eyebrow or two today. So before we get into it, go ahead and like this video if you're all about history and food, and don't forget to subscribe, but only if you really want to keep learning about the weird stuff I dig up. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. We read every comment and always love seeing you Night Owls. Alright, time to dim the lights low, get cozy, and let's get into it. Picture this. You're in ancient China, strolling through the bustling streets of a city in the Tang dynasty, surrounded by the sounds of vendors shouting, markets clattering, and, oh yeah, the smell. Forget your Instagram-worthy plates of sushi or steamed buns. No, in ancient China, food had a whole different vibe. You step into a food stall and the first thing that hits you isn't a wave of fresh ginger or savory soy sauce. It's the smell of, well, let's just say, interesting ingredients. Back in those days, Chinese cuisine wasn't all about noodles and Peking duck. Oh no, that would be way too simple. The more exotic offerings were the ones that really got attention. You think you've seen weird meats in your local Asian market? Well, let me take you back to ancient China, where dog meat was served in some parts of the country, especially during the colder months. Yeah, you heard me right. Dog. The idea was that it provided warmth and energy for those long, chilly winters. I mean, who needs a fancy heating system when you can chow down on man's best friend, right? But it doesn't stop there. If you thought dog meat was a shocker, how about insects? Yep, the ancient Chinese didn't shy away from a little crunch. Crickets, grasshoppers, and even ants were considered fair game. And believe it or not, people actually liked it. Insects were packed with protein and were a way to get that extra energy boost. Perfect for anyone trying to survive the long days of farming or working in the fields. It's not exactly your standard snack today, but back then it was a go-to for many. And here's the thing. Food wasn't just about taste or filling your stomach, it was about balance. The ancient Chinese believed that food had the power to balance your health and your life. Everything from the temperature of your food to the flavors, sweet, sour, salty, bitter and spicy, was thought to have an effect on your body's harmony. It wasn't just about getting something tasty on the table. It was about aligning your dish with the natural world and keeping your yin and yang in check. That means, depending on the season, the weather, or even your personal health, your meal had to reflect these elements. For example, spicy foods were used to balance out the dampness of the rainy season, while cooler, fresher ingredients were eaten during the summer to help beat the heat. But food was also a social marker, and I'm not just talking about the rich folks in their grand palaces. The wealthy ate differently, and it wasn't just because they had more to spend. Their food often symbolized their status in society. For the upper class, the imperial courts were a whole different ball game. You wanted to show off, you served up peacock turtle soup or even shark fin. Forget about your everyday dumplings. This was next-level stuff, my friends. When you had the money and resources, meals were performative. Food was a way to show your wealth, sophistication, and even spirituality. It's said that some emperors had to taste-test dishes to ensure they were up to imperial standards, as food was also seen as a form of divine blessing. The significance of food goes beyond the material and into the spiritual. The idea that food was a means of connecting with the gods was deeply rooted in ancient China. Offerings were made to ensure a good harvest or to show respect to the spirits of the ancestors. In fact, many of the dishes served in these courts weren't just about filling a belly. They were rituals to honor the spirits, and with food as a vehicle for connecting with the spiritual realm, rice stood as a symbol of life and prosperity. It wasn't just something to eat, it was a revered gift. And at feasts, rice was often offered to the gods before it was ever touched by human hands. The ceremonial importance of food made it so much more than just fuel for the body. It became a way to connect with higher powers, ensuring that prosperity continued. But what about the commoners? Well, they were eating rice and grains, yes, but not necessarily the same way. Rice was a luxury item for the wealthier folks, and for most, millet, barley or wheat were the grains of choice. There were regional differences too. In the southern regions, where rice could be grown in abundance, it became the core of the meal. In the north, barley and wheat were more common, especially for making noodles and bread. But just like the imperial courts, the food eaten by the lower classes had its own form of symbolism. The act of gathering food, cooking and sharing meals was community-oriented. It represented survival, strength and unity in the face of adversity. And then there's fermentation. Because what's ancient food without a little something funky? The ancient Chinese were all about fermentation. From pickled vegetables to fermented tofu, they knew how to make things last. In fact, some of these fermented dishes, like stinky tofu, have stuck around for centuries. If you've ever caught a whiff of stinky tofu, you know that smell can make your stomach do a backflip. But the taste, apparently it's worth the sacrifice. Fermented foods were part of the preservation culture, a way to store food for the lean months. Speaking of weird food, let's talk about another favorite in ancient Chinese cuisine: pickled everything. Yes, pickles were big. Cucumbers, radishes, even pickled eggs. They weren't just about the sour flavor, they were a preservation technique, and they helped to combat the extreme humidity in some areas. Plus, they provided essential nutrients during the winter months when fresh vegetables were harder to come by. So, yeah, ancient Chinese food wasn't your typical takeout. It was weird, wild, and definitely not for the faint of heart. But it was also deeply tied to their culture, their beliefs, and their way of life. You didn't just eat to stay alive, you ate to connect with the world around you. Whether it was through balancing your body's energies or showing off your wealth and power, food in ancient China was about more than just what was on the plate. And trust me, we've just scratched the surface. The crazier stuff, that's still coming. So if you're ready to dive deeper into the weird and wonderful world of ancient Chinese food, stick with me. Things are about to get even stranger. All right, now that we've set the stage, let's talk about something really fascinating. The role of food in ancient Chinese society. Food wasn't just something you ate to survive. It was a reflection of where you stood in society, your connection to the universe, and even a way to show respect to the gods. Yeah, you heard that right. Food wasn't just for your stomach. It was a huge part of the culture, the spiritual beliefs, and the social structure. Let's break it down. Picture yourself back in ancient China. Food wasn't just a meal. It was a status symbol, a spiritual practice, and a way to maintain balance in the world. Whether you were in the imperial court or living in a small village, what you ate and how you ate it said a lot about your place in society. So first, let's talk about food as a status symbol. Back in ancient China, food was a clear indicator of your social status. If you were part of the upper class or in the imperial court, food was about luxury. We're talking shark fin soup, peacock, and even turtle soup. These were the foods that defined wealth and power. The more exotic, the more rare, the more expensive. That was how you knew you were eating like a king or emperor. In fact, many emperors were known to host lavish feasts where the food wasn't just for eating. It was also a symbol of their divine power. The more rare and extravagant the dish, the more they could show off to their court or anyone who was lucky enough to get an invite. It wasn't just about enjoying good food, it was about making a statement. And let's not forget the special rituals and ceremonies around food, especially in the court. For the emperor, food wasn't just a meal. It was a way of keeping the spirits happy and ensuring the dynasty's prosperity. Now, for the common folk, things were a little different. While the rich were eating peacock, the regular folks were eating things like millet, barley, and wheat. Sure, rice was a staple in the south, but up north it was mostly grains and vegetables. But here's the thing, just because the commoner's meal was simpler didn't mean it wasn't important. Food was still a community affair. When food was scarce, it wasn't just about filling your belly, it was about working together. You'd share meals with neighbors, and that act of sharing was just as important as the food itself. It was about unity, family, and survival. But here's where things get really cool. Food wasn't just about satisfying hunger, it was also about maintaining balance. Ancient Chinese philosophy is all about yin and yang, right? The balance between opposites, hot and cold, light and dark, male and female, and so on. Well, food was no different. What you ate was supposed to align with the balance of the universe. In practice, this meant that certain foods were considered cooling, yin, while others were warming, yang. For example, spicy foods like chili peppers were yang, perfect for the cold winter months, when your body needed some extra heat. Meanwhile, foods like cucumbers, tofu, and fruit were yin, helping cool the body during the sweltering summer months. Food was also used to maintain balance within your body. If someone was sick or out of balance, certain foods were prescribed to restore harmony. Ginger for colds, ginseng for energy, and chicken soup for everything from exhaustion to bad luck. It wasn't just about eating for taste, it was about eating for health and spiritual balance. Now, food was also deeply connected to ancestor worship. You didn't just eat because you were hungry, you ate to show respect to your ancestors. Offerings were made to the gods and the ancestors, particularly during important festivals or rituals. These meals weren't just about satisfying the body, they were about connecting to the spiritual world and ensuring that your ancestors would bless you with prosperity and good health. During festivals like Chinese New Year, families would offer food to their ancestors, often rice, dumplings or fruit, as a way of honoring them. The food would be laid out on the altar, and after the ceremony it would be shared among the family, symbolizing the continuity between the living and the dead. The idea was that the food would pass from the living to the ancestors and back again, creating a cycle of respect and blessing. Even everyday meals had an element of this. A simple bowl of rice wasn't just a meal, it was a way of continuing the cycle of life. Food was a sacred bond that connected past, present, and future. Let's talk about food during festivals for a minute. You've probably heard of the foods that are eaten during Chinese New Year: dumplings, fish, and rice cakes. But have you ever wondered why these foods are chosen? Well, it's all about symbolism. For example, dumplings are eaten because they look like ancient gold coins, symbolizing wealth and prosperity. Fish is a must because the Chinese phrase nian nian yu yu, nian nian yu yu, translates to "may you have surplus every year." Fish symbolizes abundance and a bountiful future. And rice cakes, they symbolize growth and progress as they expand when cooked, just like the hope for a year of growth. These foods weren't just tasty, they were rituals. They were how people marked the passing of time, honored their ancestors, and made sure they had a good harvest in the year to come. The food was a prayer, a wish, and a promise, all rolled into one. So, what did the commoners actually eat on a daily basis? Well, a lot of it was about simplicity and sustainability. The everyday meals of the average Chinese person in ancient times were made up of basic ingredients: rice, noodles, vegetables and grains. There wasn't much meat involved unless it was a special occasion, but don't be fooled, just because it was simple didn't mean it wasn't packed with meaning. Take pickled vegetables, for example. You'd think it's just a way to preserve food, right? Well, yes, but it was also about survival. When fresh veggies weren't available, you'd pickle them to make sure you had something to eat through the winter months. It was food preservation, and it was vital for keeping the community alive and well. No matter where you stood in ancient Chinese society, whether you were a king or a farmer, food connected everyone. It didn't matter if you were eating luxurious shark fin soup or simple rice and vegetables. Food had the power to bring people together, to create unity, and to reflect the values and beliefs of the society. Whether you were celebrating a festival, honoring your ancestors, or just sitting down to a meal, food was always a ritual, a blessing, and a symbol of the interconnectedness of all things. During the Zhou dynasty, one of the most transformative periods in Chinese history, food played a central role in society, agriculture, and the development of culinary traditions that would echo through centuries. This era, which spanned from around 1046 BC to 256 BC, laid the foundation for much of the food culture we associate with China today. It was a time when agriculture advanced significantly. New foods and preparation techniques emerged, and the culinary practices of the ancient world began to take on new forms. The Zhou people's culinary habits reflected their evolving society, and their meals were deeply tied to spiritual practices, daily survival, and social status. The Zhou dynasty marked a shift in agricultural practices that had a profound impact on food production. The Yellow River Basin, where much of Zhou civilization thrived, became a fertile area for growing a wide variety of grains, including millet, wheat, barley, and rice. The people of Zhou were skilled farmers who employed new tools like the iron plough, which allowed them to cultivate land more efficiently and produce enough food to support their growing population. This increased food production led to more diverse diets and a shift away from the religious and ceremonial use of food, which had dominated the earlier Shang dynasty. People were no longer solely relying on food as an offering to the gods. Instead, food became a vital part of everyday life. For the Zhou people, grains like millet and barley were staples of the diet. These were often made into porridge, bread or dumplings and served alongside vegetables and small amounts of meat. Though the Zhou dynasty saw the rise of more sophisticated farming techniques, much of their daily diet still depended on what they could grow locally. For those in the wealthier parts of the empire, food could be a symbol of status, while for commoners it was a matter of survival. The simple staple foods of the Zhou period provided sustenance, but they also represented a way of life tied to the land and the seasons. One of the defining features of Zhou cuisine was its use of fermented foods, which were essential for preserving food during times of abundance so that it could be consumed later. Fermented foods like soybeans turned into fermented soy paste, a precursor to soy sauce, played an essential role in enhancing flavors and helping preserve food for the colder months. Pickling also became a widespread practice during this period, with vegetables like radishes, cucumbers, and mustard greens being preserved through fermentation. This allowed the Zhou people to enjoy these foods year-round, even during the long, harsh winters when fresh vegetables were scarce. But Zhou cuisine wasn't just about practical preservation, it was also about enhancing flavor. The use of fermentation added an extra dimension to meals, creating a distinctive flavor profile that would define Chinese cuisine for generations to come. The use of fermented soybeans for making sauces and pastes gave dishes a rich, savory depth, while the pickling of vegetables added a sharp contrast to the typically milder flavors of the grains and meats. These early forms of fermented foods laid the groundwork for the rich and complex flavors that would become staples in Chinese cooking, like soy sauce and miso, which we still use today. The Zhou people didn't just experiment with grains and vegetables, they also began to explore the use of exotic meats. While it may seem strange to us today, the consumption of dog meat and other unconventional proteins became a part of Zhou society. Dog meat was believed to have warming properties and was particularly sought after in colder months to help provide energy and warmth. It was thought to have medicinal qualities and was often used as a tonic to strengthen the body during the colder parts of the year. Although the consumption of dog meat was not universal across China, it began to appear in certain regions of the Zhou Empire, especially in the north. Along with dog meat, the Zhou people also began to explore the use of other wild game. Snakes, turtles, and even insects found their way into Zhou diets. These exotic meats were not only seen as food, but also as a way to boost vitality, stamina, and even wisdom. In ancient China, certain animals, especially those with symbolic significance like turtles and snakes, were believed to possess special powers. Eating them was thought to give the consumer strength or insight, as though consuming the animal's spirit could impart some of its qualities. These strange meats, along with the Zhou's experimentation with new ingredients, marked the beginning of a food culture that was focused on both survival and the search for health benefits. The combination of different meats, often paired with fermented sauces and stews, made for hearty, energy-boosting meals that could keep the Zhou people strong through difficult times. While it may sound unusual today, these culinary practices were tied to the spiritual beliefs of the time. Animals like the dog, snake, or turtle were not just food. They were sacred beings whose powers could be transferred through consumption. As the Zhou dynasty continued, the role of food in Chinese society evolved. It was during this period that the practice of pickling vegetables and fermenting grains became commonplace. The Zhou didn't just preserve food for practical purposes, they also recognized the health benefits of fermented foods and their role in enhancing the overall flavor of a meal. This practice of pickling vegetables in particular grew in popularity, as it allowed people to extend the availability of fresh produce and make the most of the harvest. Pickled vegetables became a staple in Zhou cuisine, often served as a side dish to accompany main meals, providing a tangy and crunchy contrast to the softer textures of stews and grains. Though pickling and fermentation were important, the use of meats was still central to Zhou meals. While pork, beef and chicken were eaten regularly, it was the addition of wild meats like rabbit, deer and wild boar that began to mark the Zhou period as a time of culinary experimentation. These meats were often used in stews or roasts, and the Zhou people became skilled at preparing meat in various ways, braising and slow cooking it to tender perfection. The meats were cooked with herbs and spices, creating rich and flavorful broths that added a depth of taste to each meal. Though meat was still somewhat of a luxury, it was becoming a more common part of the diet, especially in the imperial court, where extravagant feasts showcased the variety and exoticism of the Zhou food culture. By the end of the Zhou dynasty, food had become a central part of the cultural and spiritual life of China. What had started as simple grains and vegetables evolved into a rich and diverse culinary tradition, which would continue to evolve and develop through the following dynasties. The Zhou laid the groundwork for a food culture that wasn't just about eating. It was about balance, health, and honoring tradition. The use of fermented foods, exotic meats, and preserved vegetables would carry through to later dynasties, eventually becoming the foundation of modern Chinese cuisine. In summary, food during the Zhou dynasty wasn't just about survival, it was about using food to create balance, explore new flavors, and connect to the spiritual and medicinal aspects of life. The Zhou people's exploration of pickling, fermentation, and the introduction of exotic meats set the stage for the development of the diverse and rich food culture that would define China for millennia. Whether it was the humble grains of millet or the unusual use of dog meat, the Zhou dynasty's food culture was anything but ordinary, and it laid the foundations for what would become one of the most sophisticated food traditions in the world. The Qin and Han dynasties were two of the most transformative periods in the history of ancient China. While the Qin dynasty, 221–206 BC, was short-lived, it laid the foundation for the mighty Han dynasty, 206 BC, 220 AD, which saw the consolidation of Chinese civilization. It was during these periods that Chinese cuisine began to evolve in new ways, with a growing influence from trade, cultural exchange, and the expansion of the empire. Food, during the Qin and Han periods, began to reflect a more unified empire, where traditional practices were merged with the newly introduced ingredients and techniques. Agriculture advanced, culinary practices diversified, and some of the most iconic ingredients that would come to define Chinese food culture were established. Let's take a look at how food evolved during these pivotal periods and how the cuisine laid the groundwork for the rich, diverse food culture we recognize today. When the Qin dynasty emerged, it unified China under a single ruler, Emperor Qin Shi Huang, who is famous for his strict authoritarian rule and monumental projects, including the Great Wall. But when it came to food, the Qin dynasty was much more pragmatic. They advanced agricultural methods, introduced irrigation systems, and established policies that helped increase food production. Agriculture during this period became more focused on efficiency and production than ever before, laying the groundwork for the massive population growth that would occur in the Han dynasty. Rice, already popular in the southern parts of China, became even more widely cultivated in the north, helping to create a more balanced and diverse diet for people across the empire. Wheat, barley, and millet continued to be staple grains, but now, alongside these, the introduction of soybeans played a pivotal role. The humble soybean would become one of the most important ingredients in Chinese cuisine, providing a source of protein and leading to the development of tofu, soy sauce, and fermented bean pastes, all of which are staples in modern Chinese cooking. The growth of trade routes, particularly the Silk Road, opened up access to new spices, fruits, and vegetables from the West. As the Han dynasty expanded its influence across Asia and beyond, it created opportunities for cultural exchange and the introduction of foreign ingredients. Ingredients like grapes, pomegranates, and dates began to make their way into Chinese cooking, influencing both desserts and beverages. These fruits became part of the diet for the upper classes, as they were considered exotic and luxurious. When we think of Chinese cuisine today, we often think of pork, chicken, and beef, but during the Qin and Han dynasties, the use of meat was quite different. The availability of meat was still limited for most people, but for the wealthier classes, exotic meats like wild boar, deer, and even bear were a sign of status and luxury. Wild game was often served during feasts and special occasions, where the upper echelons of society could show off their wealth and power. These meats were often prepared in stews or roasted over a fire, seasoned with various herbs, spices, and fermented sauces to enhance the flavors. For the common people, however, pork remained the primary meat. Pig farming became more widespread during the Han dynasty, and pork became a crucial protein source for many people, often paired with rice or noodles. Pork was versatile, used in stews, dumplings, and sautéed dishes, and it was often preserved through pickling or salting. As the Han Dynasty flourished, seafood also gained importance, especially in coastal regions. The Yangtze River and the Yellow River were crucial to the development of fish farming, and various river fish became a major component of the diet. Shellfish and crustaceans were also commonly consumed, particularly by those living near the coast. The use of fish sauce and fermented shrimp paste began to appear more regularly in cooking, helping to intensify the flavors of soups, stews, and dipping sauces. Fermentation played a key role in the development of Chinese food culture during the Qin and Han periods. The Chinese had long understood the preserving power of fermentation, but it was during the Han Dynasty that these methods really began to evolve into what we know today as fermented foods. Fermented soy products like tofu, soy sauce, and fermented bean pastes became common in the diet, particularly as a source of protein for people who didn't have regular access to meat. The use of fermentation to enhance flavors also led to the creation of a variety of pickled vegetables. These vegetables were often pickled in brine or vinegar and served as a side dish or a condiment to accompany heavier meals. The pickled vegetables helped balance out the richness of meat-based dishes and provided a sharp, tangy flavor that was refreshing. The pickled mustard greens, radishes, and cucumbers became popular during this period, forming the foundation of many traditional Chinese side dishes. Fermented foods not only preserved food for later consumption, but also became a cornerstone of Chinese flavor profiles, contributing to the umami flavor that is so characteristic of Chinese cuisine. This culinary development continued to shape the sauces and soups that are so essential to Chinese cooking. As the Han Dynasty expanded, the concept of the banquet began to take root. Food was no longer just a means of survival, it became a way to celebrate wealth, power, and cultural exchange. The rich and powerful would host elaborate banquets that featured multiple courses, with delicacies like roast meats, exotic fruits, and delicate pastries. Banquets were not only about food, they were an expression of status and affluence, and the ability to serve the finest dishes became an essential part of Chinese courtly life. Banquets often included a wide array of vegetarian dishes, from stir-fried greens to sweet lotus root and bean curd, demonstrating the growing sophistication of Han cuisine. Some banquets even featured fruit displays and cakes made from rice flour, designed to showcase the skills of the cooks and the abundance of the harvest. One of the most famous foods to come out of the Han Dynasty was steamed buns. These soft, fluffy buns were filled with meat, vegetables, or even sweet fillings, and they became a staple of both the rich and the poor. Over time, the steamed bun would evolve into one of the most recognizable foods in Chinese cuisine, often served in restaurants and as street food. Food during the Qin and Han dynasties was much more than sustenance. It was a reflection of China's growing agricultural capabilities, the expansion of trade routes, and the cultural evolution of the empire. It was a period of experimentation, where ingredients and culinary techniques were refined and new foods were introduced. From the rise of fermented soy products to the expansion of meat consumption, including wild game and seafood, the Qin and Han periods played a pivotal role in the development of Chinese cuisine. The Qin dynasty may have been short, but it laid the foundation for the Han dynasty, which saw the flourishing of banquets, the introduction of exotic ingredients from the Silk Road, and the use of fermentation and preservation to ensure that food could be enjoyed throughout the year. The Han period gave rise to culinary practices that would shape Chinese food for centuries to come, cementing the importance of food as both nourishment and cultural identity. As we look back at the food culture of the Qin and Han dynasties, we see that they weren't just feeding a growing population, they were laying the groundwork for a culinary tradition that would evolve and spread across the globe. From pickled vegetables to steamed buns, the food culture of the Qin and Han dynasties remains an integral part of Chinese cuisine, and their influence continues to be felt today. The Song dynasty, 960–1279 AD, is often regarded as one of the most culturally rich periods in Chinese history. This era marked a time of profound economic prosperity, technological advancements, and cultural flourishing. It was also a time when Chinese cuisine became more refined, innovative, and accessible. The development of food culture during the Song dynasty reflects the growing importance of urban life, culinary techniques, and elevated dining practices. In this chapter, we'll explore the evolution of food culture during the Song dynasty, focusing on urbanization, the rise of restaurants, the introduction of new ingredients, and the increasing sophistication of cooking techniques that laid the foundation for modern Chinese food culture. The Song dynasty was characterized by a rapid increase in urbanization, particularly in cities like Kaifeng and Hangzhou. These urban centers became bustling hubs of commerce, culture, and daily life. With the growth of cities came a corresponding increase in dining out and the development of restaurant culture. Street food, markets, and eateries became central to urban life, and food began to play a more public and communal role in society. The growing popularity of restaurants during the Song dynasty marked a significant shift in Chinese dining culture. Prior to this period, food was typically prepared at home or in small family-run businesses. However, during the Song dynasty, dining out became a popular activity for people of all social classes. The Song capital, Kaifeng, was home to numerous eateries and restaurants offering a variety of dishes from simple noodles and rice porridge to elaborate feasts. These establishments served a wide array of customers, from merchants and scholars to officials and travelers. The Song dynasty also saw the rise of tea houses, where people could relax, socialize, and enjoy a cup of tea alongside snacks or light meals. These tea houses became important centers for socializing and cultural exchange, where scholars and poets could gather to discuss their ideas, and common people could unwind after a busy day. Tea culture, which had flourished in earlier dynasties, reached new heights during the Song period, and the art of tea preparation became more refined. The Song dynasty saw the introduction of new ingredients, many of which came from the regions of Southeast Asia, Central Asia, and beyond. The expansion of trade and the increased interactions with foreign cultures through the Silk Road and maritime routes played a crucial role in bringing new ingredients and spices into Chinese cuisine. One of the most notable new ingredients introduced during the Song dynasty was sugar, which began to be used more widely in desserts and sweet dishes. Candied fruits, sweet pastries, and sugar-based beverages became popular, particularly among the wealthy. Sugar also began to be used in savory dishes, where it was combined with soy sauce or vinegar to create unique sweet and sour flavors that would become a hallmark of Chinese cuisine in the centuries to come. The Song dynasty also saw the introduction of new spices and seasonings, such as cinnamon, cloves, and star anise. These spices, which had been brought to China through trade routes from the Middle East and Southeast Asia, added depth and complexity to Song dishes. These new flavors were incorporated into both meat-based dishes and vegetarian fare, and they played an important role in the development of soups, stews, and braised dishes. The Song dynasty was a period of refinement and innovation in Chinese cuisine, with significant advancements in cooking techniques. The use of stewing, braising, and steaming reached new levels of sophistication, with chefs developing complex recipes that combined tender meats, fragrant herbs, and delicate seasonings. These techniques allowed chefs to create dishes that were not only flavorful, but also visually appealing. One of the most significant developments in Song cooking was the refinement of the wok. The wok, which had been used in China for centuries, became a staple of Song kitchens. Its versatility and ability to cook food quickly at high heat made it an essential tool in Chinese cooking. Wok cooking, which includes techniques like stir-frying, deep-frying, and sautéing, became popular during the Song dynasty and remains a cornerstone of Chinese cuisine to this day. The use of broths and stocks also gained prominence during this period. Chefs began to create rich, flavorful broths using bones, meat, vegetables, and herbs, which served as the foundation for many soups and stews. These broths were simmered for hours to extract maximum flavor and nutrition, and they were often paired with rice or noodles, making them an integral part of the Song diet. During the Song dynasty, rice and noodles became the dominant staples in the Chinese diet. Rice, which had been a staple in southern China for centuries, became more widely available in northern regions thanks to improved farming techniques. It became the centerpiece of most meals, often served with vegetables, meats, and sauces. In the north, wheat-based products like noodles and dumplings became increasingly popular. These wheat-based foods were hearty and versatile, often served in broths or stir-fried with vegetables and meats. Rice porridge, known as congee, was a popular dish among both the rich and the poor. It could be served plain or with a variety of toppings such as pickled vegetables, meats and fermented soy paste. It was a simple yet nourishing meal that could be eaten at any time of day. Noodles also played an important role in Song cuisine. Hand-pulled noodles, a technique that would eventually become famous in Chinese culinary traditions, likely originated during the Song period. These noodles were often served in broths or stir-fried with a variety of ingredients, making them a versatile and satisfying dish for people from all walks of life. One of the most significant contributions of the Song dynasty to Chinese cuisine was the development of sweet dishes. The use of sugar in cooking began to expand during this period, particularly in the form of sweet pastries and candied fruits. Sweet rice cakes and fruit-based desserts became popular, and the Song people began to experiment with different ways of combining sugar with spices and flavors. Sweet bean pastes, made from aduki beans and mung beans, were used to fill pastries and dumplings, creating a harmonious balance of sweetness and richness. These desserts, often enjoyed during festivals or special occasions, became an integral part of the Song culinary tradition. The Song dynasty also saw the further development of banquet culture, where elaborate feasts were held to celebrate special occasions or to honor guests. Banquets in the Song period were grand affairs, with multiple courses of rich meats, delicate vegetables, and refined sweets. Roast duck, braised meats, and exotic dishes like sautéed lotus root or braised bamboo shoots were common fare at these events. For dessert, sweet pastries and candied fruits would be served, often accompanied by tea. Banquets were not only about food, they were a display of wealth, status, and sophistication. The elaborate preparations and attention to detail in both food and presentation reflected the luxury and refinement of Song society. The Song dynasty marked a period of tremendous growth and sophistication in Chinese cuisine. With the rise of urbanization and the development of restaurant culture, food became an integral part of daily life in cities. The introduction of new ingredients such as sugar and spices helped refine Chinese cooking, while the increased use of tea, rice and noodles as staples created the foundation for the Chinese diet. Cooking techniques like wok frying, braising and broth making became central to Song cuisine, leading to the creation of complex and flavorful dishes. The Song dynasty's innovations in food, from the introduction of sweet dishes to the rise of banquet culture, have had a lasting impact on Chinese culinary traditions. The food culture that emerged during this period continues to influence modern Chinese cuisine, where balance, variety, and creativity are still celebrated today. The Yuan dynasty, 1271–1368 AD, represents one of the most fascinating chapters in Chinese history. Established by the Mongol Empire under the leadership of Kublai Khan, the Yuan dynasty was a period of profound cultural exchange and transformation. Unlike the more traditional Han Chinese rule that preceded it, the Yuan dynasty was characterized by its multicultural and cosmopolitan nature, as Mongols and various ethnic groups mingled with native Chinese populations. This fusion of cultures had a lasting effect on Chinese food culture, resulting in the incorporation of exotic ingredients, the evolution of cooking methods, and the rise of new food traditions. In this chapter, we'll explore the food culture of the Yuan dynasty, examining the introduction of Mongolian influences, the expansion of rice and noodle dishes, and the growth of tea and sweets in Yuan society. Despite being short-lived, the Yuan dynasty played a pivotal role in shaping the development of Chinese cuisine in ways that resonate to this day. The Yuan dynasty's unique cultural backdrop, dominated by the Mongols, had a major impact on food practices. Mongol cuisine was deeply rooted in nomadic traditions, and the emphasis on meat and dairy products became a key feature of Yuan food culture. The Mongol diet primarily consisted of meat, including mutton, beef, horse, and camel, as well as milk products like yogurt and cheese. These Mongolian culinary traditions blended with Han Chinese food to create new meat-heavy dishes that became popular during the Yuan period. One of the most notable impacts of Mongol food culture was the widespread consumption of mutton and beef in the Yuan dynasty. Mongol-style dishes like stews and roasts were prepared with large cuts of meat, sometimes cooked over open fires or slowly simmered with vegetables and spices. Mutton hot pot became a signature dish, with spices and aromatic herbs enhancing the rich flavors of the meat. This style of cooking, which often involved grilling or roasting large pieces of meat, was distinctly different from the more delicate stir-fried dishes that had been common in previous dynasties. The influence of Mongol cuisine also introduced new methods of preserving meat. Mongol herders were skilled in the art of drying and smoking meats to preserve them for long journeys. These methods became common in Chinese cuisine during the Yuan dynasty, especially in northern regions, where the winters were cold and fresh meat could be difficult to come by. Jerky and smoked meats became a standard part of the diet, often paired with noodles, rice or bread, to create a hearty, filling meal. The rise of noodles and wheat-based products. Although rice remained a staple in the southern regions of China, wheat became increasingly important during the Yuan dynasty, especially in the north. The Mongols, who hailed from the steppes of Central Asia, were accustomed to wheat-based products, and their influence on Yuan cuisine helped popularize noodles, dumplings, and bread across China. The Yuan dynasty saw a rise in noodle culture. Wheat noodles became popular in both the north and the south, and dumplings filled with meat or vegetables were widely consumed. The availability of wheat allowed the Chinese to experiment with new pasta-like dishes, with thin and thick noodles, both served in broths or stir-fried. Fried dough and steamed buns, called mantu, also gained prominence during this period, with fillings ranging from savory meats to sweet bean pastes. The use of wheat flour for bread making was also heavily influenced by Mongol culture. While Chinese bread had previously been limited to steamed buns or cakes, during the Yuan dynasty, the development of flatbreads, similar to the naan or pita found in Central Asia, became common in the northern regions. These breads were often served with soups or stews and became an essential part of Yuan daily life. One of the most enduring legacies of the Yuan dynasty's food culture is the development and refinement of tea culture. Tea had already been a staple in Chinese society for centuries, but during the Yuan period it became more popular and widespread thanks to the efforts of the Mongols in expanding trade routes across the empire. Tea drinking ceremonies became more elaborate, and the practice of serving tea to guests became an important part of Chinese hospitality. While tea had been enjoyed for centuries, the Yuan dynasty witnessed the refinement of tea preparation methods, as well as an increase in the types of tea available. The Mongols, who had encountered tea in their travels, helped to spread the custom of drinking tea to regions outside of China. Green tea, black tea, and compressed tea cakes all became popular, and the practice of serving tea with sweets gained traction during this period. The development of sweet dishes also became a significant part of Yuan food culture. Sugar, which had been introduced to China via trade with the Middle East, became more widely available and was used to create a variety of sweets. Sweet pastries, sugar-coated fruits, and syrup-based desserts became common, especially in the imperial court and among the wealthier classes. Sweet bean pastes and sweet rice cakes filled with jaggery or dates became popular as festive treats during holidays and special occasions. Tea and sweets combined to create a unique dining experience where refreshing tea complemented rich desserts. This pairing would go on to become an integral part of Chinese dining culture, particularly in southern China, where tea houses became centers of social life and conversation. The Yuan dynasty was an era of global exchange, where different cultures and ideas flowed freely across the empire. The Mongols were not just conquerors, they were also cultural ambassadors, introducing new culinary techniques, ingredients, and customs from regions as far-reaching as Persia, India, and Europe. This period saw the introduction of exotic spices such as cinnamon and cloves into Chinese kitchens, giving rise to more complex and layered flavors. The use of spices became particularly popular in the preparation of stews, curries, and marinades, influenced by the Mongols' encounters with spice-rich cultures in the Middle East and Central Asia. The Yuan dynasty was also a time when new cooking techniques began to emerge. The Mongols brought with them their tradition of roasting meats over open fires, a technique that gradually became incorporated into Chinese cooking. Roasted meats, like lamb and mutton, once rare in China, became more common, and grilled skewers, similar to the Turkish-style kebabs, gained popularity. Marinades, including those made with vinegar, soy sauce, and fermented bean paste, became staples in Chinese cooking. This practice, which is still central to modern Chinese cuisine, was heavily influenced by the Mongol culinary tradition and the need to preserve meats over long periods of time. The Yuan dynasty stands as a remarkable period in the history of Chinese food culture. Despite its relatively short duration, it profoundly impacted the trajectory of Chinese cuisine. The Mongol influence brought with it an emphasis on meat-based dishes, particularly mutton and beef, which became central to Yuan cuisine. The introduction of wheat-based products, including noodles, dumplings, and flatbreads, marked a significant shift in the food culture of northern China, blending Mongolian and Chinese culinary traditions. The refinement of tea culture, the rise of sweet dishes, and the expansion of trade routes all contributed to the cosmopolitan nature of Yuan cuisine. The Yuan dynasty helped to integrate new flavors, cooking methods, and ingredients, and its influence can still be seen in modern Chinese cuisine today. From grilled meats and tea rituals to the widespread use of spices and sweets, the Yuan dynasty's culinary innovations laid the groundwork for the culinary diversity that would define Chinese cuisine in the centuries to come. The Ming dynasty, 1368–1644, and the Qing dynasty, 1644–1912, represent the final chapters of Imperial China's long history, and their influence on Chinese cuisine cannot be overstated. During these periods, Chinese food culture reached new heights with increased sophistication, regional diversity, and refinement. The Ming and Qing dynasties witnessed the culmination of culinary techniques, the expansion of regional cuisines, and the creation of dishes that are still beloved today. As China faced both internal growth and external influences, its food culture evolved in response to these forces, paving the way for modern Chinese cuisine. In this final chapter, we'll explore the key developments in food culture during the Ming and Qing dynasties, focusing on the refinement of flavors, the spread of regional dishes, and the introduction of new ingredients from around the world. From the rise of the imperial kitchen to the increased popularity of street food, these dynasties left an indelible mark on China's culinary legacy. During the Ming and Qing dynasties, imperial cuisine became a symbol of wealth, power, and sophistication. The emperor and his court dined on elaborate meals that featured some of the finest ingredients from across the empire. The imperial kitchen, under the strict supervision of highly skilled chefs, prepared multi-course banquets with meticulous attention to detail. The Ming dynasty saw the development of imperial banquets where dishes were designed not only for flavor, but also for visual appeal. Artful presentation with beautifully arranged dishes and intricate carvings became a hallmark of imperial dining. The use of golden trays, jade bowls, and fine porcelain served as a display of the emperor's wealth and authority. The cuisine served in the imperial court was not limited to extravagant meats and fish. It also included finely crafted vegetarian dishes such as braised mushrooms, stir-fried vegetables, and pickled fruits, which showed the growing appreciation for the diversity of flavors in Chinese cuisine. These meals were carefully balanced in terms of flavor, texture, and color, reflecting the Chinese belief in the harmony of the five elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. The Qing dynasty, with its Manchu rulers, brought with it a new level of elegance and refinement to the imperial kitchens. The Manchus, who had their own distinct food culture, incorporated their meat-heavy cuisine into the imperial diet. Peking duck, one of the most iconic dishes in Chinese cuisine, rose to prominence during the Qing dynasty and became a dish reserved for the elite. This dish, known for its crispy skin and tender meat, would go on to become one of China's most famous culinary exports. While the imperial court may have enjoyed its luxurious banquets, the food culture of ordinary people during the Ming and Qing periods was just as rich and diverse. The rise of regional cuisines marked a significant development in Chinese food culture. Different regions of China, from the north to the south, from the east to the west, began to develop their own distinct food traditions, influenced by geography, climate, and local ingredients. In the north, where the climate was colder and wheat-based products like noodles, dumplings, and steamed buns were common, people began to rely more on mutton, pork, and beef. Noodle dishes, including the now famous hand-pulled noodles, became a staple in the northern diet, often served in broths or stir-fried with vegetables and meat. In the south, where rice and freshwater fish were abundant, people focused on lighter, flavorful dishes, often featuring vegetables, seafood, and soy-based products like tofu and soy sauce. The Cantonese culinary tradition, for example, emphasized fresh ingredients and delicate preparations, with dim sum, roast meats and stir-fried vegetables becoming staples in the south. The Sichuan region, known for its bold and spicy flavors, developed its own unique culinary style characterized by the liberal use of chili peppers and Sichuan peppercorns, which provided a distinct numbing heat. Mapo tofu, kung pao chicken, and hot pot were among the many iconic Sichuan dishes that gained popularity during this period. Meanwhile, the Jiangsu and Zhejiang regions, with their proximity to the Yangtze River, focused on freshwater fish, delicate broths, and sweet and sour flavors. The cuisine of these areas was known for its subtlety, with ingredients like shrimp, crab, and vegetables prepared in light, flavorful sauces. Hangzhou's Westlake fish in vinegar sauce became a beloved dish during the Ming and Qing dynasties, showcasing the region's focus on fresh, high-quality ingredients. As regional cuisines flourished, the concept of street food also grew during the Ming and Qing dynasties. Food stalls and markets became vibrant parts of city life, where people could enjoy quick and affordable meals. Dumplings, buns, noodles, and roasted meats could be found in abundance, and these street foods played a major role in the daily lives of both the rich and the poor. The diversity of regional dishes, combined with the emergence of street food culture, made Chinese food more accessible to people of all classes. During the Ming and Qing dynasties, the arrival of new ingredients and the development of new culinary techniques continued to shape Chinese food culture. The age of exploration and global trade introduced a variety of foreign ingredients to China, further enhancing the complexity of Chinese cuisine. One of the most significant ingredients introduced during the Ming dynasty was chili peppers, which came to China through Portuguese traders and eventually became a fundamental part of Chinese cooking, particularly in Sichuan and Hunan cuisines. The spicy and fiery nature of chili peppers added a new dimension of heat and flavor to Chinese dishes. The introduction of potatoes, tomatoes, and sweet potatoes during the Qing dynasty also had a lasting impact on Chinese food culture. These vegetables, which were brought to China from the New World, were quickly adopted into Chinese cooking, especially in soups, stews, and stir-fries. Potatoes, in particular, became a popular staple in the northern regions, where they were used in a variety of dishes, including dumplings and patties. The rise of tea culture continued during the Ming and Qing dynasties, with the development of green tea, black tea, and oolong tea becoming more prominent. Tea drinking became a central part of Chinese society, with elaborate tea ceremonies and the development of tea houses where people could gather and enjoy tea while engaging in conversation, poetry, and entertainment. The Ming and Qing dynasties left a profound legacy on Chinese food culture, shaping the way Chinese food is prepared and enjoyed to this day. The refinement of imperial cuisine, the spread of regional dishes, and the introduction of new ingredients laid the foundation for modern Chinese cuisine. The influence of street food, regional specialties, and the fusion of foreign ingredients contributed to the rich, diverse culinary landscape of China. As the world's most populous country, China's food culture continues to evolve, yet many of the dishes and techniques that originated during the Ming and Qing dynasties remain integral to the country's culinary identity. The flavors, textures, and presentation styles developed during these periods have stood the test of time and continue to influence the way Chinese food is prepared, served, and enjoyed around the world. The Ming and Qing dynasties were transformative periods in the development of Chinese food culture. Through imperial cuisine, regional diversity, the introduction of new ingredients, and the rise of street food, these dynasties shaped the foundation of the cuisine we recognize today. From the refined banquets of the emperor to the sizzling street vendors in bustling markets, the legacy of the Ming and Qing dynasties can still be seen in every aspect of Chinese culinary traditions. Let's raise a bowl of noodles or a cup of tea and honor the rich history of food that has evolved over millennia. And there you have it, folks. From the humble beginnings of ancient Chinese food culture to the grand feasts of the Ming and Qing dynasties, we've traveled through centuries of culinary evolution. It's incredible to see how trade, cultural exchanges, and innovation came together to shape the food we know and love today. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the history of Chinese food, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. It really helps out the channel, and if you're new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more fascinating history stories and culinary explorations. Also, I'd love to hear from you. What's your favorite Chinese dish? Or maybe there's an ancient food that you're curious about. Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching and sticking with me through this journey of flavors, history, and delicious discoveries. Until next time, keep exploring, stay curious, and remember, food has a story to tell in every bite. Catch you in the next video.